New Delhi's diplomacy is being tested, and trade is at the center of it. Since early August, Washington has ramped up tariffs on Indian exports, first imposing a 25% reciprocal levy, then doubling it to a 50% penalty, explicitly linked to India's continued purchases of Russian oil. The White House has underscored that these tariffs aren't just trade measures, but sanctions meant to pressure Moscow into ending its war. These sweeping actions now threaten nearly $48 billion worth of Indian goods. Amid rising pressure from the West, India is strategically turning to its eastern and northern neighbors. Russia. The diplomatic signal is clear. India bypasses a cancelled US trade visit and deepens its engagement with Russia. India's External Affairs Minister is headed to Moscow, reaffirming their long-standing special and privileged strategic partnership. Meanwhile, Russia's envoy in Delhi floated the idea of reviving a trilateral dialogue with China, calling the US-imposed sanctions unjustified. China. A visible thaw is underway. High-level visits, including Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's trip to Delhi, have yielded meaningful progress. Direct flights are set to resume, trade and investment channels are reopening, and both countries are tightening coordination on border management through new institutional mechanisms. In a rare admission of rapprochement, Prime Minister Narendra Modi described the ties as steady progress, pointing to mutual respect and upcoming talks with President Xi at the SCO summit. To understand what this shifting landscape means for India's economy, trade strategy, and future positioning, I spoke with Stephen Matthias, chairman of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. What followed was a bold, no-filter exchange. Stephen didn't hold back in laying out the harsh realities of these tariffs, the competitive pressures India faces, and the urgent course corrections the country must consider. Let's get into it. So, hi, good evening, Stephen. Thank you so much. Welcome to Point Break.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Stephen. So today's discussion is on to understand what is the impact of US tariffs on India. A lot has been happening over the last few months, and even recently, as latest as yesterday, the White House said that Trump imposed tariffs on India to end the Russia-Ukraine war, and now they call India tariff a sanction. So with all this happening, where does India actually stand in this whole situation?
Sure. So I think we can break this into two parts. The first is the 25% tariff, which is long-term unless India and the US can strike a tariff deal. And the second one, which is the oil-related tariffs, which is another 25%. So we start with the first one. By and large, we have two sets of competitors. We have China on one hand, where overall tariffs largely would be over 50%. And so there's a benefit to us when we compete with China. But of course, the Chinese, the extent to which they supply goods to the US is many, many times more than India. And so we can compete only in some areas. The second type of competitor are Asian countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and so on. By and large, those countries are at about 19-20%. So there is a significant differential there. Whether we can overcome that or not remains to be seen. As has been noted recently, the rupee has fallen against the dollar by about 5%. So that itself takes care of 5% of the difference. So I think, there will be some goods where we can compete. There will be some goods where our exporters might lose out. That's with regard to the 25%. Once we get to 50%, then I think we're basically blown away from the US market. And there's very little that we can supply unless we, use some kind of jugaad methods, which have been used also. You send goods to another country, export it from there. The US is concerned about transshipment in these types of cases, so the US will be watching for that too. So by and large, those are the implications when you look at these two different levels.
Got it, Stephen. So, but with all this happening, isn't it natural that then India would kind of strengthen their bonds with their neighboring country, China or Russia, and wouldn't US's dependency come down at some point in the future?
Well, neighboring countries are not really markets. The markets are the developed countries. So I think when we're looking for new markets, then we'll be looking at other developed countries like the UK or the EU and so on. India's already signed a trade agreement with the UK, so that's useful. And we are believed to be negotiating with the EU as well. So the faster that trade agreement can get concluded and signed, the better it is for us. With regard to China, I mean, China is like enemy number one for a while. So the possibility that the US pushes India towards China it's more like India's caught in a tight place with US at one side and China on the other side. I think there are some moves to improve relations with China, and I think that's helpful. Particularly, there's scope for a lot more trade, a lot more investment from Chinese companies into India, which has largely been blocked for the last few years because of foreign investment restrictions. So by and large, I think the aim would be to look at new markets in developed countries.
Got it. And so, I mean, you touched upon the implications, but do we see a larger threat to the whole situation if it doesn't improve, say, in the next few months?
Yes, I think so, because at 50%, as I said, we're really not there as a player in terms of exporting to the US market. 50% just too high for us. But I think the larger issue is a possible breakdown in friendly relations between the two countries. Right now, the US has not looked at imposing tariffs on services. If they do, then that could be very dangerous for our economy. And President Trump is the sort of person who will do things that have not been done before. At the moment, there's no talk of it, but it's possible in the future. So yes, there is some worry over that, and I do think we should make some attempts to, remedy this relationship and kind of build it back.
So what do you suggest, Stephen? Like, what should the country do right now? What is a step forward?
So the first thing I think is that there probably needs to be more engagement at the political leader level, which is our Prime Minister talking to President Trump. President Trump has been known to like to conclude deals himself personally. So it's not just a deal between his country and another country, or between his economic team and that country. It's him personally and that country. And so I think we should have more engagement between the Prime Minister and the President. I think that's the first thing. The second one is we need to look at our tariffs. President Trump has called us the tariff king. And by and large, it's true that our tariffs are higher than that of our competitors. So we need to change that. And there is some belief also that these high tariffs are actually not beneficial to the Indian economy, particularly when you're trying to import inputs, for example, and you have high import duties. So I think we need to do that. We also need to relook at what we call non-tariff barriers, particularly these new quality control orders, which impose particular standards which are not in compliance with international standards, and then require certification by Indian authorities, which means a product certified overseas also needs to be certified in India. So some of those things are not even beneficial for the Indian economy, and doing away with that will actually help Indian companies as well, because they can then just set their standards to international standards. So the next one would be the oil issue. So I think here, we've had it good importing cheap Russian oil. My understanding is the cost differential is not all that much. And I think that, it's not just the fact that our exports are under threat, but there's industry behind that. There are people working in those industries behind that. They could all be affected. But the larger part is, we are in an ecosystem which is led by the US, and the US is the biggest player. And to get on the bad side of the US, not be able to export to them, I think that's just there are implications, all sorts of implications which don't work for us. So I think getting out of oil exports, or rather, at least having a discussion with the US and making some commitments which the US want on oil exports, because obviously this is a changing, timeline, and as Ukraine and Russia hopefully get closer to a ceasefire and to peace, then this issue will become less relevant. But we need to talk to the US and make some commitments which they might want. And then finally, I think there's something which I've heard repeatedly in the past from people within the US government, and that is India has always been somewhat of an unwilling suitor. Often it's the US wants to be closer to India, but India doesn't want to be. So maybe we've created too much of a wall there, and there's probably some frustration from the US side, which has probably led them to a point of, we don't really care that much about India anymore. And the Indians think that they are valuable because India is a kind of alternative or a defense against China, but perhaps that's not the case. So I think India needs to demonstrate more substantially that we are an ally of the US and we are friends of the US, and often that means sometimes you do things that your friend wants you to do, even though you're not that willing to do it.
God, Stephen. But just one last thing. But like you said, you probably should have more engagements. But looking at how President Trump has been kind of going back on certain things, imposing new tariffs. So what is the guarantee that we do speak to them, and probably tomorrow he's going to change again based on his whims and fancies?
Well, if you look at Japan or the EU or South Korea or the UK, they've all got deals in place with the UK, so with the US, so they understand that President Trump can change the rules of the game at any time, but they've still done it. And what they've done is they've preserved their ability to continue to trade. and you've got to just be proactive, and you've got to kind of be nimble and react with the times, and react and take new decisions and new paths based on what President Trump decides.
All right, Stephen. Thank you for your time. This has truly been insightful.
You're welcome.
What we heard from Stephen Matthias was unvarnished truth. US tariffs are more than a trade dispute. They are a geopolitical lever. For India, this moment is about more than absorbing a shock. It's about rewriting its role in a reordered world. The choices New Delhi makes now toward Washington, Moscow, and Beijing will set the course for years to come. That's all we have for this episode of Point Break. I'll be back with more conversations unearthing the developments that shape our country. Until then, stay sharp, stay curious, and think AI, think AIM.